Mr. Wagner of Great Lakes Justice, and I'm just going to let him, his resume is quite long. I'll let him kind of give his background real quick and think, no background, okay. Let's just do that professor up here and then we'll start.
Whatever you need, whatever you want. You got 5, I can do 5 hours. All right.
You're a Baptist.
Yeah, well, I'm a Baptist. And I've been accused of being a legal evangelist, so. All right, we'll do the 20-minute version. They want to talk about parental rights tonight. And, you know, to do that, I'm going to talk where that comes from. I'm going to tell you where your constitutional liberty that says you have a fundamental right as a parent to control and direct the upbringing of your child. And that is especially true with regard to the educational choices of your child and the medical decisions that affect your child. And you're thinking, wow, well, if that's true, then how come I see the government all the time doing things that seem to be, you know, like a bulldozer just blowing over that? Now, I'm going to talk about this Constitution here. But before I do that, I want to make sure that we understand that it's not just the law where there's a collision going on here. It's not just a policy where there's a collision going on here. There's a worldview, there's a vision, a perspective of how we see the world, the lens through which we see the world, a huge battle that is going on deciding, you know, who owns your child. Is it nannies and blue berets? Is it the UN that gets to say, well, we've got the Convention on the Rights of the Child here, and every country in the whole world has signed on to it except for the United States? Come on, what's wrong with you, citizens of the United States? Why don't you also sign on to the Convention of the Rights of the Child? Well, partly because it's doing all those things that are happening in your public schools right now, what you're rejecting and that you're upset about, but it would enshrine it in the American constitutional law. And it would replace the idea that you have a fundamental right to control and direct the upbringing of your child, and you are the one that knows what is in the best interest of your child, and it would replace it with an expert, a social worker, some school official that would then say, well, you no longer have the right to control and direct the upbringing of your child. You have the responsibility to. Now, guess what? If the government can be the entity that gives you your rights, what can they do with them? They can also take them away. On the other hand, if you put on that clear worldview lens, the one that our founders put on, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, endowed by their Creator with a capital C, by the way.
Right.
Endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable, that means you can't take it away, with certain inalienable rights, including life and liberty. And the U.S. Supreme Court then said liberty from the beginning of time. And when our founders wrote the word liberty, it meant the right, if it means anything, it means the right of a parent to decide what is the best interest of their child. If it means anything, it means the right of a man and a woman to marry, have a child, and control and direct the upbringing of that child, especially with regard to educational choices. And there were a large number of U.S. before these large number of U.S. Supreme Court cases, this goes all the way back to the Bible. You can find it in the Bible. What? We're supposed to train up our children, right? And I can go through, we got 20 minutes, so I'm not going to go through the 50 different verses that clearly show that God hasn't delegated much to government at all. And one of the things he did clearly not delegate was the raising of your child, because you can see in the Bible, he clearly delegated the controlling and directing the upbringing of it to who? To you. To you. And all the common law that came after that, and all the natural law thinkers, all the scholars of the day, it all reflected that divine law. And so when we began to have disputes in the United States, the first case, Meyer versus Nebraska, rose to the Supreme Court. And the government, through their, lawmaking, made the law that you gotta, educate your child in a certain way and only using certain languages. Parents don't get to decide. Government's going to decide how to do it. Well, that's the first time that the court, looked at what the Bible said, looked at what, all of the common law in England and all the law that came before that. They said, wow, since the beginning of history, this has been a limit on the exercise of government power. It is parents, not the government, that decides these decisions, that makes these decisions. And then there was another case, Pierce versus the Society of Sisters. Imagine someday that a government school and a government comes to you and says, you no longer can send your child to a private school. You can't send your child to a religious school. And don't even think about homeschooling. And if you do, we're going to prosecute you. Imagine if some government did that. Well, guess what? Some government already has done that. And that's exactly what the law said. It said you had to send your child to the public school, to the government school. That was challenged, went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Supreme Court says what? This is liberty. And since the beginning of time, liberty has included and especially meant the right of a parent to control the direct upbringing of the child. Now, what the court did in those cases, they would go to a special closet and they would bring out their special microscope. And anytime the government was using power, and this power cord, for those of you that see me before, this power cord represents the exercise of government power. Anytime the government uses power in a way that interferes with your fundamental, inalienable constitutional rights, the government faces the microscope. Because the Supreme Court brings out the microscope and they puts that exercise of government power under the microscope. And they look at it very, very closely. We lawyers call it strict scrutiny. And the court requires the government, if they're using their power in a way that interferes with your inalienable fundamental right, including this right to raise your child, then the government has to have the most compelling reason under the law, and they must use the least restrictive means possible to carry out that compelling reason. Do you know how many laws survive that kind of what we call strict scrutiny under the microscope? Virtually none. Virtually none. And so when, in the Society of Sisters case, when the government said, you gotta send your kid to the public schools, and they used the power of the government to do that, they brought up the microscope, struck down the law, unconstitutional. It's probably the clearest and some of the strongest law out there with regard to Supreme Court jurisprudence. Additional cases follow that. Unfortunately, the most recent case, the court still recognized and called it a fundamental right, but they stopped treating it as an inalienable fundamental right, and they didn't really clearly bring out the microscope. And so it's kind of left other courts out there with the question, how much scrutiny do we give to a government exercise of power that interferes with this constitutional right? And guess what? Power abhors a vacuum. You give anybody in government an inch, and guess what you're now seeing? Part of the reason you're seeing this increased exercise of immense government power over the control of your child is because either, number one, they no longer care about the constitutional rule of law, or they know about it and they're defying it. And so the ACLU sends out a letter to every single superintendent and principal in the state and says, you are violating the law if you tell a parent that their child is engaging in sexual behavior that their parent may find objectionable. Or if the child is confused and is going through, some confusion and is identifying a different section. It's breaking my heart because all the science out there shows that so many of these kids, they need help, they need their parents, and they're committing suicide. And now they're being told, these teachers are being told they can't tell upon pain of being fired. You can't tell the parent. Well, it's time for the parents to stand up. And that's why you see what's happening in places like Virginia, and places like Michigan, and places like right here in Shiawassee with all you guys here. I was just in a meeting in Jackson the other night, and I did this series of 6 weeks on the Constitution. They had 350 people show up 6 weeks in a row listening to it. The country is waking up. Parents are waking up. You didn't need me to get up here and lecture on the Bible or the Constitution of what your rights were. You knew that. You knew who was responsible for controlling and directing the upbringing of the child the first time you put that child on your chest when it was born. You knew that it wasn't some UN bureaucrat or expert that was best equipped to say what is in the best interest of the child. And so I'm going to sit down here now. But there's where your rights are. They're rights, they're liberties. These liberties are supposed to exercise, they're supposed to serve as a limit on the exercise of government power. So anytime government uses that power, the liberty limits the exercise of that power. The free exercise of your religious conscience, the free exercise of your religious beliefs, the free expression, your right to petition the government, your right to control and direct the upbringing of your child with regard to educational decisions. Those are limits on the exercise of government power. Now remember, I started this talk saying this is a battle of worldviews. The lens through which I just described, they're trying to crush it. And they want to replace it with a different lens that says liberty comes from government. And we will tell you what your rights are. And if you want to see the difference, and this is how I'll finish, the one lens, the one perspective through which to see the world is enshrined in our declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Why do we hold these truths to be self-evident? Because God puts the law in our heart. That we're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. We're created equal because we're made in the very image of God. That's why we treat every single human being as worthy of respect, and why the government must respect every individual, no matter who you are. Amen. The other side wants to change that and say, you know what? There is no outside standard to look to. You don't look to God's standard. You're the standard. Each one of you gets to make it up. Each one of you gets to decide your own personal autonomy. Each one of you gets to decide your own identity. And all of a sudden, unhealthy, dangerous, and what has always been immoral behavior and conduct now all of a sudden becomes part of who I am. And so therefore, if any of us in this room challenge it, we're accused of attacking a person. We never attack a person. As Christian people, we know that every person, no matter who they are, no matter what they're doing, they're made in the image of God. And yeah, if somebody tells me that I can't stand up and say, my religious conscience says that there is sin, there's an answer for sin, and yes, you may find your identity in your sexuality, but I find my identity in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. If we can't have this conversation in America, then we're in trouble.
That's right. That's right.
My challenge to you is to be fiercely, fiercely unafraid to speak the truth. Boldly do it, but let them see the heart of Jesus.
Amen.
Because we're never going to change the position of the leaders that are indoctrinating all these people. But all these people that are being indoctrinated, that's our audience. That's our audience. And I think in their heart and in their gut, they know that the other side has gone way too far. They've crossed a line that is naturally understood as being wrong, because every mother at one time in their life has put that baby on her breast after it's been born. And they know immediately in that very moment who God has called to control and direct the upbringing of a child. And it's not some expert at the UN or the U.S. Congress or the state legislature. God bless you. Thank you for your time.
Can you take other questions, Professor?
Sure, but I do not want, I know what it's like to be the next speaker, and so I do not want to interfere with his time.
I will be very brief.
Yeah.
And this is about hardening our schools. After these school shootings, this is one of the things I found to be exceedingly offensive as a parent. You just said we need to stand up. We need to let the truth be heard. We need to make sure that we're being diligent and vigilant with regard to the upbringing of our kids in the schooling. I used to routinely walk into the school, eyes on it, see what was going on. Found out my 10-year-old was in a sex ed class without my knowledge or permission. That didn't go over well. But the point I'm making is with these hardenings of these schools, they've got it all locked down. You have to have an appointment. They know you're coming. There is no way that you're ever going to be able to go in there and have a conversation with these teachers. They've made it impossible for you to interact under the guise of safety on our kids. Shiawassee County, for goodness sakes. I mean, I guess a school shooting can happen anywhere, but I wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Well, very, very quickly, you're doing the right thing here. Because the answer to that is, whoever controls the school board hires the administration. And the administration decides which lens that school is going to be run through. And I'm not saying, we're not to take the secular public school and turn it into a Christian school. You don't have to do that. But there is a difference between having a school that says there is a right and a wrong, and a school that says, well, you can make it up as you go.
That's right. Amen.
And so, bottom line is when the guy goes into the girl's bathroom and commits the crime or commits an assault, yes, then we get involved and we bring the lawsuit. And when the rights are interfered, but you know what? Before then, there's other alternatives. The courtroom's the last place you want to be. And you guys are doing just exactly the right thing, except next time you come here, I'd like to see all these seats filled.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, that's exactly what happened in Loudoun County, Virginia. Started out with a room smaller than this, and it got to be a room like this, and then it became a movement. I think you're already at a movement here, and that's key. And she'll tell you, it's about power. For them, it's about power. The only thing they understand is that they can keep these two people that have all these ideas that if they had debated publicly, these two would win every single time. Every single time, and they know they would win the debates every single time. And so what's the best thing? Well, let's silence them. And that's what's happening in your schools. So you need leadership.
Just really quick, I know you said the courtroom is the last place you want to be, but I also want to ask a question regarding the history of taking God out of schools. And it's been through the courtroom, right? Taking prayer out of schools. You could document historically how we've taken God out of schools.
I've got a 2-hour speech on that specific topic.
Okay. Do you see a pathway in the courtroom to challenge the fact that not only have they taken God out of schools, but they're using our public dollars in public spaces to teach sexuality, gender identity, their values, their creed. This is their set of values.
As well as other political ideologies. And that's really what it's about. This is a battle over which kind of political ideology will govern the nation. Is it going to be a more Marxist, where we have no longer a free market, where we have government-controlled economics, where we have no longer the parents controlling the upbringing of the child, but the school through their experts deciding what's best for the child. This truly is about what kind of governance we will have. And I think it's a combination, to answer your question specifically. When I said it's the last thing, I'm not saying we're afraid. I mean, no, we're willing to go when we have to. But if we can, but I think it's a both and. Keep the pressure on through the public, where the people's voices are being heard, and don't worry that your local news station aren't ever going to cover you. Guess what? Eventually when there's a movement, it doesn't matter, anymore. And when you're doing it peacefully and you're doing it right, and you ultimately take it over, that combined with, the life, you guys are doing all your petition stuff. I'm in the U.S. Supreme Court right now on the Dobbs case, and we're representing all the people in the Michigan Supreme Court, fighting to preserve the law and to make sure that those horrible things that she just doesn't talk about don't get put into the law by judges that have no business doing it. So it's a combination. It's a both and it's a full court at this time. If you've ever done it before, if you've ever got out and supported people like Nikki, if you've ever gotten out and started saying, I'm gonna do what she just said on that petition, I'm gonna help somebody say no. Because by the way, she's nice. The other side is lying through their teeth. They're telling pro-life people this is a pro-life position. So if there ever was a time to stand up, I just had my first grandbaby. And I'm telling you, when something like that happens, you see all of a sudden that the work that you're doing and the work that all of you guys are doing, that's not just about today. It's about whether the next generation will have freedom and will be able to share the good news of the gospel, will be able to raise their children in a way that understands that there's a right and a wrong, and that we're going to love one another as he loved us. I'm taking up too much time. I'm going to get this guy up here. I'll stay late and I'll answer all the questions. But I have been in this next guy's position. I got to meet him just briefly. He's an amazing man. I can't wait to get to know him better, and I can't wait for you to get to hear him tonight. I don't want to take this.
Just going to give Rick just a few minutes here to.
Okay, sorry about that. Rick's an okay guy too. No, y'all know how good Rick is. God bless him.
Okay, I normally wouldn't do this, but